Kia ora katoa, ko Brent Toko Ingoa. It's Brent Carey here, NetSafe CEO. It's my pleasure to welcome you to our second webinar in Net Safety Week, where we've dedicated today to talking about seniors in neuro and linguistically diverse communities. And the theme this year is Diversity Matters Online Safety Done Together. Obviously, the Silver Surfers, as we like to affectionately call them, are one of our fastest growing groups of online users, and generally new internet users are likely to encounter several online risks. So it's really important that we've got Sam along today to talk about how best to protect ourselves online. And Sam is from CERT NZ. And obviously the world is moving quickly, so we are going to encounter different risks. And CERT, the government's cybersecurity agency, is of course on hand to help look at what these emerging threats are, and especially what type of threats are targeting people aged 65 and over, the young at heart. This session will touch on these main threats that are reported to CERT, along with advice on how to identify and importantly report them. So my pleasure to welcome you today, Sam, and I'm going to bow out now and hand over to you.
Awesome, thank you very much, Brent. So yeah, thanks very much for the introduction there, Brent. My name is Sam Leggett. I'm a senior analyst with the Threat and Incident Response team here at CERT New Zealand. Now today, a few things that we'll go over very, very quickly. Who is CERT, what we do. We'll look at trends in reporting specifically with our 65 and older demographic. We'll break that down into the most common cyber threats that group faces, and then we'll discuss some of the mitigations to those threats and what you can do to catch those scams out before they catch you out. So very quickly, CERT NZ is the Computer Emergency Response Team for New Zealand. We are a branch of the Ministry of Business, Innovation and Employment, and our goal is to improve the cyber resilience and online safety for all of New Zealand. We work with businesses, organisations or individuals that are or may be affected by cyber incidents, and we do that by providing trusted advice and information to help you work through an incident you might be facing and ideally stop that incident from occurring again. All the information that we collect, we endeavour to collate a profile of the threat landscape here in New Zealand, and that's where a lot of the insights from today's presentation have come from. One important distinction to make here, wherever national infrastructure or nationally significant organisations are involved, that is where our colleagues at the National Cybersecurity Centre will step in to assist. Now, how do you report to CERT New Zealand? Basically, the only thing you need to remember is cert.govt.nz. That will take you to the page that you can see below that I've taken a screenshot of the first half of. And in that big red box is a report online button. You can click there and you can report any cyber incident you might be dealing through to us. And we'll get back to you with some advice on how to work through that incident and hopefully stop it from happening again in the future. There are some categories for reporting certain things, but if you're not sure what you're reporting or you don't feel that there's a category that quite fits well, that's absolutely fine. You can still report that through to us under a different category and we can change the labeling on our end. The main thing here is that you get in touch so that we can get back to you with some advice and how you can actually move forward with the incident. So looking at the trends in reporting, specifically looking at what our 65 and overs are reporting through to us. This graph sort of shows the reporting from the last financial quarter in terms of the different demographics. Now, not everyone reports with information like their date of birth or their age, which is absolutely fine. So we've taken the data from the ones that have, and this is what we can see. Now, as you can see here, 65 and over, they're tied second for last for reporting. And there's a couple of reasons why that could be the case. One is that they may not be falling victim to these kinds of scams, but more likely is that they're not actually aware that there's an organization where they can report these kinds of scams to and actually get some kind of assistance. What is important to note here is that every single demographic in New Zealand is reporting incidents through to us. Everyone is susceptible to these types of scams, and so it's really important that we know what to look for and how to stop them before they get us. So breaking down specifically the 65 and over group and what they're actually reporting through to us. Again, this information has been taken from the last financial quarter, and the most common incident reported through to us is phishing emails. And this is the same across the board for everyone. Phishing is definitely the most common incident reported on the whole. The second most reported one there is text scam calls or scam calls in general, closely followed by smishing, which is phishing again, but done through text messages. The last most common one, is extortion emails. Now, there are a few other ones up there, but what we're going to look at is these four most common ones, primarily because they all share an aspect of unsolicited contact. So we can take some things into account when we're looking at these kinds of contact that can be applied to all these different types of scams that we can use to catch the scams before they catch us. So again, most common threats here: phishing, text phishing, scam calls, and extortion emails, and they all have in common the fact that they are forms of unsolicited contact. So looking at phishing first is the most common type of incident that's reported through to us and the most common type for this particular demographic. Phishing is a type of email scam. The sender will pretend to be from a trustworthy organization like a bank or a government agency in an attempt to get you to click on a link and in turn provide some kind of personal information. Usually what they're after is financial information. If we look at an example of one of these phishing emails, so this email claims to be from the New Zealand Transport Agency. It claims that you need to renew your license, and you can do so for $103.95 just by clicking the Renew Now link contained in the email. Now, there's a few things that we can look at to determine whether or not this is a legitimate email. The first thing that we take a look at is who's actually sent that email from us. Now, in the top right-hand corner, it claims that it's from the NZ Transport Agency, but if we look a little bit closer at the exact address it's come from, that doesn't look like an NZTA address at all. Webmaster at retrate-something-or-other-use.com, very different to what we'd expect. If we go to the NZTA website, what we'll find is nzta.govt.nz, and we would expect any emails being sent by that organisation to come from an email address ending in that domain as well, nzta.govt.nz. The next thing that we can look at is the actual content contained in the email. See, there's a question there. I'll just jump on that one. Yeah, and that's a very good question. So you get a lot of these kinds of emails coming through, even when you've never had a driver's license. And this really highlights the fact that these emails are volumetric and opportunistic. They will email as many people as they possibly can with these types of emails, even if you don't have a license, all in the attempt to just get a few people clicking on that link and providing that kind of information. So looking at the actual content contained within there, it maybe lacks a little bit of information. Typically from a government organisation like this, we'd expect a bigger email with a bit more comprehensive information in there, rather than what we've got in this particular email. The last thing that we take a look at to determine whether or not what we're dealing with is an official email or not is exactly where they're trying to take us with this link. So at the bottom of the screen, you'll see a particular link that I've pulled out of the Renew Now button. And this is trying to take us to waterpuresystems.com/wp-content/widgets, so on and so forth. Again, what we would expect here in a genuine email from the New Zealand Transport Agency is that we would be taken to a web page of some description of nzta.govt.nz. There may be some more at the end of that, but it should definitely be nzta.govt.nz. Obviously, waterpuresystems.com is not the same thing, and that's a really good indication that the kind of email that we've received here is not a genuine email. It is a phishing email trying to get us to click that link and provide our personal information. Now, if you do receive emails of this nature, the best thing to do after you've determined that it's phishing is to simply delete that from your system and ensure that you don't click on any links or provide any information. One other thing you can do is forward that email to this email address here, so fishpond@cert.govt.nz. That is a system that we've set up specifically to pull out key pieces of information from phishing emails, such as the link that it's trying to get you to click on, and we can take action against that link. We can look at the web pages that it's directing you to. We can touch base with hosting providers of those web pages and ask that they be taken down as those pages are being used for scams. We also have a service where we take note of those specific web pages, and we attempt to allow organizations to block those web pages from people within being able to access them. So we can stop people from even getting to the phishing if they do happen to click on that link. Most important thing though, once you've determined that that's phishing, just ensure that you haven't clicked any links there or provided any information, and delete that from your system. So the next most common threat that we see is smishing. Very similar to phishing, but this is orchestrated via text messages. And these are really becoming popular lately with the rise of mobile phones. So text messages where the scammer uses the text message to gain financial information, personal information, or maybe access to your phone. Usually this is done through a link as well, but there are some variations to this kind of messaging that we will take a look at. On the screen here, you'll see 3 examples of pretty much the exact same text message, and there's a few things that we're going to look at to see whether or not these are legitimate. Again, much like the emails, we can look at where these text messages are coming from. So right at the top there, we can see 3 different numbers, and what's interesting about these numbers is that they all start with +61. Now, +61 is the code for Australia, so all these messages have come from Australian mobile numbers, and they all look like individual mobile numbers, so someone's actual mobile number. Typically, when we get a text message from a big organization, they will come from some kind of short code number, so 3 or 4 digits long. I think AA's, for example, is 3661, something like that, but 4 digits in length. And this obviously does not look like that. They're coming from individual mobile numbers. Next thing that we'd look at again is the actual content of the message that we've received. So these messages claim to come from Wise, and Wise is previously known as TransferWise. It's a financial transfer service online. Claims that a new payment of 4,000 NZ dollars has been attempted from your account. So obviously it's trying to create a sense of urgency. Act quickly or you might lose $4,000. If this wasn't you, you can cancel it by clicking on the link here. It's creating that sense of urgency in an attempt to get you to click on that link. Again, we can look at where that link is actually taking us, and it's a little bit easier with the text message because the link is actually displayed in full there, versus an email where we need to hover over the button where the link is contained, and that will display the full address. In this particular case, what we would expect, the genuine domain for Wise is wise.com, and this is a little bit different. So transfer-wisemanager.nz.com, not quite right there. And if we change this to a specifically New Zealand context, we can simply change Wise for any major bank in New Zealand. Again, we'd look at the link it's directing us to, and the pages that we'd expect to get to. For example, if this was a text claiming to be from BNZ, we would expect to go to a bnz.co.nz. Now, what's really important and what scammers have been doing lately is doing their very best to make these links look as close as possible to the real thing. So this often looks like things like what you can see at the end of these links here. So nz.com. It's a very common tactic for scammers to make the end of the website addresses just slightly different. So rather than .co.nz, it might be co.nz or nz.co. Small variations on the ending of those website addresses to make it look almost right, but not quite there. If you receive one of these text messages, again, you can pop an email through to fishpond@cert.govt.nz. As long as it contains that full website link in there, we can take appropriate action against that. But what you might find is a little bit easier is to simply free text or forward that text message onto the Department of Internal Affairs at 7726. They have a very similar service set up specifically for text messages that will pull out the key pieces of information from those messages like the sender's number, like the link contained in there and where it's trying to take you, and they can take action against that as well. Again, though, the most important thing is once you've determined that that is a phishing text message, it's not a legitimate text message, is just to make sure you haven't clicked on any links and provided any personal information. So the next most common scam, and this is probably the most impactful types of scams, scam calls, mainly text scam calls, but there's a few variations on what scammers will do with calls. So text scam calls specifically are where scammers will call people pretending to be from a well-known tech company. See, we've got a question there, one moment. Yeah, so that's a really good point. The way to make sure you stay as safe as possible is just to not click on any links contained in an email. And what we've found when talking with major organizations in New Zealand is that their messaging does tend to get you to go to a website yourself rather than click on a link contained in a message directly. So if you receive a text message, typically they'll say, head to our website, log in, take whatever action you need to. If you are receiving messages like this that contain these kinds of links, if you can go to the website directly yourself, that is definitely a way to stay safe rather than clicking on the link directly. So tech scams, scammers will call pretending to be from a major tech company like Microsoft or maybe an internet service provider here in New Zealand. Often they claim, also we've seen calls lately from scammers pretending to be from bank fraud teams. What these callers will usually claim is that there's some kind of issue with your computer or your internet, or maybe that there's some kind of fraud happening on your bank account, and they need access to your device in order to repair the issue or stop the fraud from going through. Usually they'll ask that you download a third-party software to give them this remote access. Unfortunately, what happens as soon as they have that remote access, they can access pretty much everything on your device. If you are automatically logged into certain accounts online, then they can access those accounts via your device. And this usually results in financial loss for victims. There are a few different methodologies when it comes to scam calls, though. What we've also seen is that scammers will often call and they'll simply ask for credit card information or bank account login information, claiming to be from the bank's fraud team. Having spoken to major banks in New Zealand, we know that they will not call and ask for login details or credit card information. One other thing that we've seen scammers doing on calls is asking for authorization or cancellation codes. And this becomes a little bit more tricky because this is a service that banks will do. For example, if you have a transaction going out for $10,000, they may send you an authorization code, give you a call and say, hey, look, there's a big transaction on your account. We just want to make sure this is correct and this should be going through. Can you give us the authorization code that we've just sent you via text message? What scammers have started doing is actually accessing bank accounts, making large value transactions, which causes an authorization code to be sent to the account holder. They'll then call that person and say, yep, there's a big transaction on your account. We've actually sent you a cancellation code. Can you provide that code so we can stop this going through? So what becomes really important with these codes is reading the text message and understanding exactly what that code is for and making sure that that is aligning with what the person on the phone is saying. If in doubt, when you're on the phone to someone, the best thing to do, if you have any concerns, is to simply hang up that phone call, regardless of what the person on the other end may say. We know that sometimes scammers like to create that sense of urgency. And if you say you're going to end the call to verify what's going on, they'll actually get quite angry, quite abusive, and say that this needs to be sorted now. If you hang up, we're going to have to shut your account down, things like this. They really try to push that sense of urgency. The best thing to do, simply terminate the call, give the organization a call directly on a number that you can verify. If it's your bank, you can typically find a number for the bank on the back of your credit card, call them directly, explain the kind of contact that you've received, and talk it through with them to determine whether or not that contact is actually legitimate or if that contact is a scam. Coming back to a variation on text messages, and this is a slight marriage between phishing texts and call scams. So this text message is different in the sense that rather than getting you to click on a link, this contains a number for you to call. So, dear customer, your credit card has been blocked due to suspicious activity. Give us a call on this number. A couple of things that give this legitimacy. The number there is an 09 number, so it is a New Zealand number, and that does help some people feel like this is a legitimate text message. Again, if you receive something like this, the best thing to do is call your bank directly on a number that you can verify, that you know is 100% belonging to them. What will happen with these kinds of text messages, if I was to call this number contained in there, typically I won't actually get an answer to my call, but a little while later, a scammer will call me having taken note of the number that I called from, and they'll call me to orchestrate one of those more classic scam calls. So that might be a remote access scam call. That might be a call simply asking for my kind of credit card details or login details, or maybe asking for those kinds of codes. A really good rule of thumb: if you are on the phone to someone and they ask you to download any software or install any software so that they can access your device remotely, the best thing to do then is hang up the phone. We know that the banks do not need to access your devices remotely. I've recently spoken to them, and their advice is, if this is a request that you get over the phone, hang up that call, call them directly on a number that you can verify belongs to them. So the last most common threat that we see is extortion emails, and the content of these emails can change quite a lot, but typically it's where the scammer is attempting to blackmail you in order to pay some form of ransom, usually in the form of cryptocurrency like Bitcoin. Often they'll claim that they have control of your device and your data, or maybe that they were in your device whilst you were viewing adult sites online, and they have compromising images of you that they will share with your friends and family unless you pay this ransom. This here is an example of one such email. Again, a lot of words here, but basically what it says is, I was in your device, I caught you looking at some sites you shouldn't have, I have photos of you. If you don't pay me a ransom of 1 Bitcoin, I will release that to everyone you know and embarrass you really badly. Some things that they'll do in these emails to, again, provide another level of legitimacy is they'll make it look like they've actually emailed you from your own email address. This does not mean that they have access to your email address. There are quite a lot of tricks that scammers can use in order to change where it looks like an email has come from and make it look like it's come from your own email address. Another thing that they'll do is they will often include a password that you use in these emails to make it look like they know your passwords and have access to your accounts. Typically, where those passwords come from is known online data breaches or known lists of compromised passwords. And this brings me to this site here, haveibeenpwned.com. Sounds a little bit funny, but there is a genuine agreement between the owner of this site and the New Zealand government. And what this site allows you to do is enter an email address and or a password and see anywhere online where that email or password has been compromised in a known data breach. This will help to alleviate your concerns about how an attacker maybe got a password. If they claim that they've got your password, you pop it into the site and you can see that that was actually caught in the data breach a year ago. It is very common for scammers to add those known passwords to lists and use those for these types of purposes. So now looking at some common mitigations and kind of going over what we've already talked about. When we're receiving an email, actually, sorry, I do just want to go back really quickly to this email. One important note to make is that very, very often there is no basis to the claims made in these emails. Again, these are opportunistic, these are volumetric type attacks. They will send these emails out to everyone they possibly can, just trying to get a few people falling for it and paying that ransom. If you receive an email like this, I highly recommend you report it through to CERT New Zealand. We've seen a lot of these, so we can look at the wording of these types of emails and can usually determine whether or not there is any basis to the claims being made there. But typically, Typically, they have no backing to the claims that are made, and you're perfectly safe to simply delete that email from your system. Now coming to the mitigations and going over some of the things that we've already talked about, how you can spot these scams, how you can tell that they are scams, that they're not legitimate contact, and what you can do. So if we receive an email or a text message, first thing we should be looking at is where that's come from. Have a look at the sender's email address or the mobile number it's come from. And if it doesn't align with where we should expect to see those emails coming from, again, for example, if I got an email from BNZ, I would expect the email address that it's come from to end in bnz.co.nz. If it's something completely different, that's a really good sign to me that I've received the phishing email. With mobile numbers, if it's coming from a large organization, typically we expect to see that coming from a short code, but if I've gotten a text from an individual person's mobile number, that's a good sign to me that that's not a legitimate text message from that organization. The next thing we look at is where the links are actually taking us. So if this is in an email, you can hover over the link or the button that it's asking you to click, and this will display the full web page link that it wants to take you to. In a text message, as you saw, that'll be displayed in full already. Again, looking at where we would expect these links to take us and where they're actually taking us is key. Coming back to that advice that came up in questions earlier, the best thing to do is simply not click on any links contained in there and direct yourself to the legitimate website in order to take whatever action you need to. Another thing that we can look at in the emails or text messages is for spelling and grammar errors. Big organizations will take the time and effort to make sure that their emails and text messages are written properly with good English, but scammers will often not take that time. They're really trying to get as many of these messages out as they possibly can, and this often results in spelling errors or common grammatical errors. If you see a lot of these, that can be a good sign that what you've received is not a legitimate message. And often the wording of these messages will really try to create a sense of urgency. So they'll be claiming that there's an issue that we need to fix immediately. You're about to lose a whole lot of money, and we need to stop this going through as soon as possible. There's a sense of urgency in the messaging, and they're really trying to get you to click on that link or call that specific number. If we are on the phone with someone and they've asked us to install software so that they can access our device remotely, we should hang up. That's a really good indication that that call is a scam. Similarly, if we have someone calling from the likes of a bank and they're claiming that they need to know our login information or our credit card information, we can be sure that this is not something that a bank would request from us, and we can hang up that call. If we are on the phone and we have any doubts whatsoever, we should hang up and we should call that organization directly on a number that we can verify. Again, for a bank, you can typically find their genuine number on the back of your credit card. Often, it's important to know that often scammers will try to stop you from hanging up and try to stop you from talking to the bank directly. They may actually get quite rude and abusive to make it a little bit harder for you to terminate that call. But it's really important that we verify the content of the call that we've received by talking to the organization directly, talking through the call that we've received, and asking whether or not that is genuine. If you have fallen victim to any of these types of incidents and you have transferred any money or given out any of your financial details, like your bank account login information or any kind of authorization codes relevant to your bank account, the best thing to do is contact your bank immediately and explain the situation to them. It can feel a little bit embarrassing, but it's really important to contact them as soon as possible. For banks specifically, the sooner that they're made aware of these kinds of things, the more likely it is that they can take action and actually stop that going through and hopefully recover some funds. But time is really of the essence. So if you feel that you may have fallen victim and there may be any kind of money transfer involved, give your bank a call immediately and explain the situation to them. If you receive some kind of contact like this and you're still not sure, you're not sure where to go, and you just want someone to have a look to try and tell you if it's legitimate or not, you can always report through to CERT New Zealand. If you report an email or a text message to us, typically we'll be able to get in touch with the organisation directly and determine whether or not that is a legitimate kind of email or text message. If you have received a call, we can actually often take action against the number that's called you. So getting in touch and reporting that through to us as well is really important. We can stop those scammers calling on those numbers and hopefully prevent them from scamming other people in the future. If in doubt, ultimately report to CERT New Zealand and we will try to help you as best as we possibly can with as much information as we possibly can and verify these kinds of contacts as to whether or not they are legitimately from the organisation they claim to be from. One last note I really want to make here. We've engaged with a number of senior groups around Wellington. And what we found is that while this information is really helpful, what's actually most important is for it to be in a way that's accessible for these groups. At the moment, we're currently trying to work on sort of just a one-pager with all this really great advice on it that we can develop and share with those kinds of communities so that they have a bit of a checklist to go through when they receive these kinds of contacts. They can work down the list to determine whether or not it's something that they should be worried about or something that's more likely to be legitimate. If that is something of interest to anyone in this group, I'd be more than happy for you to touch base with me directly. And once that becomes available, we can share that freely amongst the audience here. And that wraps up my presentation for today. But if there are any more questions out there, I would be more than happy to answer as many as possible as best as I can.
Sam, we haven't got any open questions that have been posed, so please feel free to use the Q&A function if you'd like to ask Sam a question about his presentation today.
I see there's one there. Caused my bank to tighten their interactions. Not too sure if that's a question, but that sounds like a positive outcome. Right. Yes, so absolutely. Once that information sheet comes out, we will try to share that as wide as we possibly can. On Lance's comment there, it's been really important that we have these conversations with the banks lately and other organisations that are often contacting their customer base. It's important that the messaging across all these organisations is the same and that they're using the same kind of methodologies to contact their customers and doing it in a way that doesn't align with how scammers are doing it. Unfortunately, scammers are really sophisticated and they move really quickly in this space. But they are conversations that are constantly ongoing to try and help tighten up those interactions, as you've said. Yeah, that's a really good point. And this sort of highlights the fact that they are opportunistic with this kind of contact. So often they will touch base with you despite the fact that you are not a customer with that bank at all. They might claim to be from Spark when your internet is with Vodafone, and you're right, it's absolutely a dead giveaway. They try to contact as many people as possible, just hoping that a few will fall victim to those kinds of scams. But that is a really good point to remember. If it's an organization that you're not with, that is a great sign that that's not a legitimate kind of contact. Thank you. Are you noticing differences with the pandemic? It's a really good question. What we have seen is that, especially during the heightened phases of the pandemic with things like lockdown, we saw the wording around a lot of these scam messages changing to reflect what was going on. So with everyone at home, as you know, a lot of people were buying things online, and that's where a lot of text messages started saying things like you have a parcel waiting to be delivered, you need to clear a small customs fee for this to make its way through to you. That was typically about $1.50, but what would actually happen is that you'd inadvertently signed up for a subscription-based scam, and then about 3 days later, an $85 charge would come out. So really what we've noticed is that the wording would change to mirror what was going on in our societies at the time. That was really common and still does happen, but a lot more lately. They've returned to their more common tactics of claiming to be from banks or major technical organizations like your internet service provider.
Thanks, Sam. I think that's it for all the questions. I really appreciate that presentation. Oh, wait, sorry, we've had one more.
Yeah, you're asking me to identify myself when I'm not sure who they are. Or have me hang up and call the number I know. Yep, that's great. That's a really good point there, Lance. So when you get someone calling you and they're asking for you to identify who you are before they're willing to identify themselves, that's a really good indication to hang up that call and call a number that you know belongs to the organization. And that really is the key. If there's anything that raises a red flag for you, that makes you feel uneasy, a genuine employee with a bank will have no problem with you ending that call, calling them back directly to verify the kind of contact you're receiving. Whereas on the other side of things, oftentimes scammers have a real problem with that. And that's a good indication that it is a scam call as well. It sounds like in your case, the feedback you were able to provide to that bank has made some great changes in terms of the way that they contact their customers. So that's really cool to hear.